Just go home.
When did you meet Dad?
I met Dad.
And how?
It was in December of that year, at Christmas time.
What year?
It was 1948. It was 48, December 48, and I had gone down to it was a Rockhurst, St. Louis game down in St. Louis, and that's when I met Bill Boyle and Fred Collins was driving and all. And so right after that, I was trying to think. The Rockhurst had an NOK club, and all the guys belonged to that. And I was dating this Kevin Tanine. He was in the NOK. He was from Chicago, and so I saw Dad there. And Patty Brown had said to me that this Rita Olson, she liked Dad, and she said. So anyway, I saw him there, and I said, "Oh, he's cute. Dad had cute looks." You know, I mean, not real handsome, but you see from his pictures, his Navy pictures, and all that, cute. The nose was cute, and he had curly hair that kind of, it's like Mark's hair, he's going forward. And so he was cute, so I said, oh. So that Christmas, I was going to have a party at my house, and Patty Brown and I. So we went to Wilford, we went to Jesse Bakery. Back then you didn't get wonderful hams. And then we had a big smoked ham and cut it and everything, and had sandwiches, and we had beer. We were downstairs in the rec room.
In Gregory?
On Gregory. And so we told Bob Miller. We used to go on Tuesday night to the novenas, and we'd meet all the guys, and we'd all go together, you know, not necessarily dates. And we said, hey, Patty said, Martha, she called me Marcia, Marcia's going to have a party. And me too. And she said, bring Bill Boyle and Ray Hense. So he came over to the house. He said, who wants me to bring Ray Hense? Because Patty had been going with Bill. Who wants me to bring Ray Hense? We didn't know. No idea. So that night, they all came. And Mother had knitted me an Angora sweater. I mean, I looked like a football player in this sweater. Long green Angora. Well, anyone I danced with that night, real dance floor and all, got Angora all over him. And Dad was there. And so didn't pay too much attention to me. He was having a good time. Well, 2 days later, he called me. Well, you know, if I'd go out, like on the 28th, 29th of December, and I said, okay. So we went out. And then
Once in those days, going out was no big deal. Everybody call you up, and it seems like you had a lot of dates.
I had lots of dates. It was fun. But it isn't like it is now, Jim.
No.
It was terrible. These kids start in high school and go to the same one forever. My high school friend, when I went away to the Mount, homecoming was coming, and even back at our school, I went, well, he broke off with me because I was going with somebody else I had met. And I was into him. It was just as good. But anyway, so where was I? Oh, so then we went out on 28th, and he said, hey, you want to go out New Year's? We're going to Boyle's rec room. Well, the Boyles, you know, they're millionaires. He was Pendergast days, the dad. He did all the concrete work for all the streets and
Bill Boyle's dad?
Bill Boyle's dad. Crooked as a dog's hind leg. You know, he's Pendergast mixed up with the mafia and everybody. So anyway, don't ever show this to Bill and Jean, please. So anyway, he said, you want to at Boyle's rec room. Now back in these days, nobody had these. It was all black and white marble. The floors. He had a movie that would pull out of the ceiling that they would show movies on. We went into his bathroom. It was like a bathroom today in the new big homes. All black marble and gold knobs on everything. Well, that night, these kids were kind of wild. Those guys were real wild. And of course, Patty and I weren't. And I was shy. I was still shy. And I said, Patty, these guys are terrible. Now, Dad was 21, and I was 19. And I said, Patty, these guys act awful. And she said, Marsh, we've just got to get used to it. This is how older guys act. At 21, this is how they act. Well, of course, they drank too much and they'd pass out, you know. It was so bad. But that's when I met the Clunes, the Collinses, the Hinkies, well, naturally, Jean Boyle wasn't married then, and who else? Just Michelises and Gleasons, a bunch of guys that we've known all our life now.
So it was his crowd, and then that's how you got
It was Dad's crowd. And so then we dated, and here all the time, we dated. I didn't quit dating, and he did. He wouldn't go with anybody else. And so I went with this one. Every Friday night we'd square dance. Dad went back to school. He was taking accounting.
Where?
He had already graduated at Rockhurst. He had graduated in '49, the spring of '49. And he went back to take an accounting course because he just wanted it. He had graduated with an economics degree. And so I'm going every Friday night, never mention it at all.
So you're two-timing on him when he was at school?
Oh, all the time. And so, in fact, I'll have to tell you, before we got married, then I was at the hospital, so I was dating all the doctors down there, residents and everybody. And I met this one guy. He was really neat. He was 10 years older than I was. And he was up at the VA, and he was a surgeon.
What's his name?
Elmer Tomlinson. And so it was in October. I was getting a ring in December. And he took me up. Dad did. He said, look, if you don't quit dating, I'm not giving you a ring in December. You believe that one? So then I had to tell him, I said, I'm going to be engaged in about 6 weeks.
To the doctor?
Yes, of course I had to. Because he was always coming down and taking me out. And by then, what I had missed out on, Dad and all that guy, they went out to the Zombie and they would drink beer. I drank Coke. I never drank beer. Just always had Cokes. And, we'd just maybe get hamburgers or something. Well, these doctors, when you went out, we'd go to Playmore and we'd go to all the beautiful restaurants in town. I was thinking that was a good deal, but they were a little older, see? They knew the nice things. But anyway, that was we got married in 50, that was 51. Well, most of all in that crowd got married in 51. We were the only ones that didn't. So we did get married the following year, in June.
52.
52.
They dated for about 2-3 years?
Mm-hmm. About 3 years. 19, 20, 21, 22. 3 years.
Had a dance station in Uncle George.
Oh, that's some story. Don't let George hear this. Well, when he was out in California here, remember? He was in the Navy and got all kind of medals, and he went in at 17. I'll make this a little shorter. So when he came back home, he went to Huff's Business College, and that's where Stacia was, and he met her. Started dating her, and he wanted to get married. Well, George was like 6 years older than Stacia. He was ready. She was, oh gosh, she was 24 when they got married. He was 29. So anyway, she said no, she wasn't going to get married. So he went out and dated others and everything. Was going back to service. He used to go fishing with Uncle Jim Lewson. And
at that time, they knew each other?
Oh yeah, Jim and George very well. Well, for one reason, because he was dating Stacia, and Jeannie and Jim were married. See.
What year did they get married?
Jeannie got married in 47, my senior year. And so he told Stacia, came home, Jim Lewson said, George is leaving to go back in service. He signed up he was in the reserves. All of the reserves back then went back to the war. That was the Korean War. They were going back to. So Stacia called his house the next day, and Mrs. Cornice answered, and she said, it's Stacia. Is George there? And she said, no, he isn't. And she said, he's, leaving today. And Stacia, well, I heard that he was. I just called to tell him goodbye. And she said, well, I'll tell him when we're going to meet him at the Union Station. So when they got down there, here was his fiancée. He had gotten engaged to a friend of Stacia's that went to high school. Told her she could keep the beautiful maroon convertible. Back then, not many had convertibles. Uncle George always had zoots and gorgeous cars. So he slipped away from his mother. Told him, Stacia called to tell you goodbye. He slipped away from them, went to the phone booth and called her. And he said, did I hear you called me? And she said, yes. And he said, I want to ask you one question. And she said, oh. He said, do you love me? And she said, yes. He said, don't worry about a thing. I'll get to you when I get to my destination. He knew walking back to tell them all goodbye, he was breaking his engagement right there. So that's exactly what happened. And every day Dad would take us to work, first me to the clinic, then Stay Shore, North Kansas City to Englander Mattress Company. That's who she was working for then. She was through school. And so he called her and said that, told some lie, told her that his brother wanted the car. And then when he came home, he told her that the engagement was off. She didn't give him back the ring. I don't blame her. I wouldn't either. So then when we got married in '52 in June, we didn't use our heads. We should have had a double wedding. George came in April. He was out of service then. And they set up to get married in August. So we got married the 14th of June, and they got married tomorrow, 30th, is their anniversary. They got married the same year we did. So it was kind of interesting.
So when you got married, let's see, talk about your wedding. Where was it and all that?
Okay.
Who was your people that stood up and everything?
Okay, while we were all dating, Dan Breen, who is a multi-millionaire today, was going with his Drolette vitamin. Her name was Bradley then, and Mama was the kind that pushed her at money people. And she was my best friend from about age 19 till we got married. And so she married Ted Weideman, who had money. And so she was in my wedding, and I was her maid of honor the week before we got married at St. Peter's Church. And she's a darling girl. She'd gone to Marymount on the Hudson, and she danced, and Mother always had her in the better things. Always thought that I was the one she should run around with, and she did. So anyway, Aunt Stacia and Aunt Jean, Mary Ellen, Dad's sister, and Drolette. Well, Patty Brown was very mad at me because I didn't have her, and I should have. Mary Kongs would have been in there, but she was pregnant with Frank. And back then, if you were pregnant, you did not walk up an aisle as a bridesmaid. So Mary wasn't in the wedding. And it was good because I didn't want any more. I didn't want to have billions because it wasn't that big, Anyway, my gown was pink. First year they ever came out with pastels, pink and blue. And I wore a pink, beautiful gown. And all the girls were in white net. And they had stoles. They were strapless with stoles. They were beautiful. You'll see them in my wedding pictures. Of course, the pictures were black and white back then. And Grandpa Hense was a photographer for the Star, so he took the engagement picture and all that kind of thing. So, is that still running, Jim? He's still sleeping. So, anyway,
So who were the groomsmen?
Oh, the grooms were Uncle Jim. And Uncle Jack flew back from California. He was in service. They had just had Marcia. He was in the wedding. Bob Clune was in the wedding. Tom Thorpe was in the wedding. Those were four. I forget who the ushers were. I think it was Phil Freshall and somebody else. But and we had a big wedding. It was at St. Elizabeth's Church.
So how many people do you think?
At the church? Oh, we probably had 300. 200 to 300 invitations. No, there was probably an amount of people that went out. We probably sent 175 invitations, had around 300. And of course, then, I was still connected with the clinics. All the doctors came. And like to the reception, they didn't that morning. 2 of them came. And let's see what else. And back then, you would put all your gifts up in your bedroom. So they were up in Ramsey's master bedroom, all on shelves. And somebody would stay up there and unwrap them as they came in and put them on. We didn't even get the privilege of unwrapping our own gifts. The person upstairs would unwrap them and put them on with it, and they got them all mixed up, and I didn't know who sent what. That was awful. But I worked it out. I never did figure out what Dr. Smith gave me. I just said thanks for the gift. That was terrible. So that was that, and then we bought a house in January.
Did you go on a honeymoon?
Oh, yes, we did. We went out to Denver and almost got killed. I fell asleep at the wheel on the way out, and Pop got me back on the road, and then pulled over, and he drove. And then we were coming around a mountain, and this was true, he'll tell you too, a truck came at us and pushed us way off. And I mean, our wheel was ready to go over the side. And it rattled the two of us so bad, Dad had to pull over, and he got out. He was shaking like a leaf. We almost went over that mountain. But didn't.
They probably weren't wearing seat belts either. Probably weren't wearing seat belts either.
Oh no, they didn't have them. Are you kidding? None of you kids did. You'll stand next to me in the front of the car and everything. So anyway, we went out there on a honeymoon, and in January prior to when we got married, we bought a house. And it was over in Overland Park. And
what was the address?
7220 Woodson. It was over in Queen of the Holy Rosary Parish. And they were all little kind of row house ranches. And so we picked everything out. Well, I had gone, for my wedding, I picked out pine cone dishes. So what do you think? No. So first of all, I got paper for the kitchen, pine cones. So when I went down to pick out my dishes, oh, I found pine cone dishes in Lenox. That was the dumbest thing I ever did. They look just, I'm leaving them to Renee.
They're nice.
Because I think she would appreciate them.
You don't like them?
Oh no, they're gorgeous. But they've got pine cones in green, gorgeous for Christmas time for dishes. 10 times prettier than these Christmas dishes with all the, you know, how the holly and all on them. But it was the idea, I picked them out because my wallpaper was pine cones. And so in the meantime, Dad played poker. He's always played poker with all the guys, saying his old crowd. And I had a bedroom. It was a little tiny, it wasn't this big. It was so small. And we put knotty pine paper on that because it was going to be the poker room. Well, needless to say, when they came, they played out in the kitchen because we had a huge kitchen and pulled the table out in the middle of the room. And so anyway, but that's when we bought the house. And Dad would come over all while it was being built after work, you know. He'd run over, they lived on Walnut 76, and he'd bring Mary Ellen with him. The neighbors were wild about the gal that he was going to marry. They said, cutest blonde, she is darling. Well, she was gorgeous and still is. And so pretty soon we got married, and when we came home, they said, what happened? This gal's got black hair. Well, it was brown, but anyway, it wasn't Mary Ellen. It was only because he was going home, and she'd say, I'll go and see what they're doing at the house. So it was kind of cute. So then we struggled with 6 years with no baby. Everybody had one. The minute they got married, you'd have a baby the next year.
And that was probably hard for you to
it was awful.
wait that out.
I was miserable. I was so miserable. We'd take trips. We'd go to New Orleans, and we went down to Florida. We went up to Minnesota, and I'll never forget, this was awful down in. We were in New Orleans, sitting next to the water. It was the Lake Pontchartrain, I think, that was right outside. We're looking in the water, and we're having a nice dinner, and I looked over at him, and I said, I'd rather be home with 4 kids than sitting here looking at you. Wasn't that awful? The poor guy, he just said, I know. We will still. I don't know, we won't. I thought to myself, we'll have to adopt him, I know. And that's what you did back then. Well, we worked through that, and all of a sudden I was down. Oh, then after we got married, I left the clinic, and I went down to General Motors.
What year is that?
That would be in 52. August of 52, 2 months after. And I worked down there.
How much money were you making at research?
Well, at research, we started in like 60 a month, and I think we got up to 100, which was a lot. That was a lot of money. But we did the Army. This was something else. We did the Army, came through the clinic every day from the state of Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and one other state. They all came to be inducted into the Army right there. And what war would that have been in 52? Was that
Korea?
Vietnam? Was it Korea?
Yeah, until 53.
Well, there you go. That's because that's what Georgia. Okay, that was it. And we took chest X-rays. Dr. Lockwood, he was the head of the whole thing. He had a big name. He was one of the first radiologists. One of the first. Can you imagine that X-ray started back just a short while before I went in training. And he said he would give us all a penny for every X-ray that we took. So some months I'd get $180. Another month I'd get $140. Then it'd drop down to $90. Oh, we'd throw it. We had so much coming in. And my dad had told me, he was a saver, he said, I'll match whatever money you can put in the bank. I'll match you. Well, when I was making my 50, it wasn't too hard. I wasn't putting anything in hardly. Well, when I got up to these hundreds, I put the whole thing in. He said, I can't match you. He didn't have that kind of money to match me.
Does he still have the business that by then? Or was he out of the business by then?
Dad?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Laying auto top and seat covers.
He was still going then.
Oh, gosh. He went until Gary was about 6 weeks old when he retired.
Okay.
And he had 3 buildings, and now Hallmark bought them all.
So was he doing pretty well after the war and all the business?
Oh, gosh, yes. Because that's when everybody needed seat covers, and they used to put on cheap, and then he would put on the nylon. This came out of the wartime, and they'd last forever. And he put on auto tops, and of course he was the best in Kansas City on auto tops. So
then you were working there, and then you quit working at research, and where'd you go?
then I went on down to, when I quit at the research clinic, I went over to General Motors, and I started out there at 243 a month.
It's like double what you made.
Oh, well, by the time I finished, I was up to 175. But I started it, and I should get more because I was training pay. And so Dad was making, don't tell him I told you this, he was making 225 on his job.
At Allstate?
Yes. And I started out at 240 with, it was 43, whatever it was 293 a month I made. That was cost of living. I got a cost of living along with my salary. So I was doing 290, and then, here was the thing. He would play poker on Saturday, and I'd take overtime because I had made $20 for working on Saturdays. Then I had the car, we just had one. I would take him, I would go to pick him up over to poker, and we'd get in the car and I'd say, did you win? Oh, broke, just broke even. He broke even all the time. And I said, hey, look, if I'm going to work on Saturday and get overtime, I said, you're not going to play poker. So we had to quit poker. Had to quit playing on Saturdays because it made me mad. I said, I'm not going to go. And of course, they needed people for overtime because we were building one of the big F-something jets, which, of course, I did all the chest x-rays for them all coming into General Motors just for cars. And I did all the, the blood work and all the physicals. And
for people that were getting hired.
And then
Was that the one over in KCK?
Yep, down on Kindleberger Road and Fairfax Road. It's gone now, but I've never seen the new one, but that was the old one. And of course, then, let's see. Oh, I guess that was about all. Oh, then it was funny. So of course, every month I'd run to the doctor trying to find out and get checked out on why I wasn't getting a family going. So all of a sudden one day I said, Stell, this was my supervisor. Oh, I loved her. I said, I think I'm pregnant. She said, oh, you're kidding. Let's run up to Duncan Lab and get a test. You'd go up and get the rabbit test back then. You couldn't do it any other way. And so I said, I don't want to call the doctor because he'll think I'm crazy. So she said, I'll call Joel. That was her son-in-law. He was a doctor. She said, Joel, I want you to call Duncan Labs and tell him that Martha Line is coming up there for. He said, now, Stell, what are you doing? Is this some girl that's in trouble? She said, no. So I went up, and here came back the message. And so we heard the next day, it's positive. I got on the phone. I was so excited. I called Jeannie, and I called Stacia, and that went all over the whole company because the operator was listening in. Everybody knew I was pregnant. So anyway, we laughed about that.
Were you like 4 weeks pregnant or something like that? Probably?
2 weeks, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I couldn't wait. I could not wait. So that was cute. Then when Gary came, I quit in December. He came in February. And going home, I remembered that last day. Oh, they had parties for me and showers. And on the way home, I'm going up Brookside Boulevard, and I was going to go to Wolferman's. It was the last time I was going to get to go to Wolferman's because I wouldn't have any money anymore. And I couldn't buy my sweets. So I stopped and I got cinnamon rolls and went right on to Nana's and Grimsey's house. We sat and had cinnamon rolls, and of course they knew that it was, I was quitting and all. But they could.
Cool. So where'd you have Gary and when?
My birthday was February 26th, and that's when I knew that I was going to the hospital. So he was at St. Mary's Hospital. We went in about midnight, went by and picked up Nana. She wanted to go to the hospital. So that was at midnight, and he came at 9 the next morning. And he was 6 pounds something. And then Mark came, okay, so the same thing. We had to wait on Mark. We had problems getting pregnant again. So then when Mark was coming along, had to go through all kinds of tests all over. And he came September the 5th, 4.5 years later. That's why there was almost 5 years difference between the two. And for some strange reason, you just flipped in there 2 years later. And Mark was a pill. He would not.
Talk about Gary first.
Oh.
What kind of baby was he?
He was a good baby. He slept a lot. He ate lots and lots. He was the biggest, fattest of all of them. They used to tease because I'd put him in that high chair and they'd say a jar of this and a jar of that and a jar of that and half of this and half of that. Well, he just would cry when I quit feeding him his half jars. So I'd finish off all the jars. And it was too much for him. And he was so big. They used to call it, and then of course Aunt Jean cut all everybody's hair. You remember that? And I remember he had beautiful blonde curls down here. And so we were living on Woodson, and Aunt Jean was on Madison. We were going to go back over and eat dinner with her. All three of them, Kay, Patty, and Kevin, were born by then. And so when I got back, they'd cut all his curls off and shaved him. Back then, you got burr cuts. You didn't have a nice, little bit of hair. It was just.
You didn't know they were going to?
No, Jeannie just decided it was time to get rid of those curls. Well, it was. I can't stand these baby boys if they let the hair like Uncle Jim Hense. He looked just like a girl. That was awful. You shouldn't do that to boys. Oh, I can't say it. Maybe that's why he has to look like this. With all the curls. So. You never know. We don't know. Just a while back, we all used to say, well, are they born gay or is it something they acquire? Well, but I thought, if it was meant an acquirement deal, I could see why he wouldn't be. Anyway, let's get back to, let's see, that was, then the worst of all was when you came. That was
We'll talk about Mark.
Oh, Mark, he was a good baby. And just fell into line, everything was fine. When he was three weeks old, back then you baptized him right away. You didn't wait. But it was how they did. But when we had Gary, I remember, Aunt Stacia and Uncle George stood up for him. And do you think I went to the church? No. I stayed home like a queen, just laying there while they took him up to church. Aunt Stacia and Aunt Jean, Uncle Jim, and George, my mother and Dad took care of all the kids over at the house. The ton of kids with George's and Stacia's and Aunt Jean's, while we all went, and I stayed at home on Woodson by myself and waited for them to come back from the church. Because you had to go about 10 or 12 steps to get into church. It's an auditorium now, but back then it was our church. And when they came back, they had carried over a great big angel food cake with chocolate icing. And we sat out in the kitchen and had that and coffee and tea. And
We'll talk about, like, in each kid, once you'd have them, what would they have you do? Like, now you'd go home within 2 days from the hospital and you'd be at, what would happen when you'd have a baby then?
When you had a baby, and I had Gary, you stayed 7 days at the hospital. If you were going home to take care of yourself, if you were going to your mother's and you had help, you could go home in 5 days. But you couldn't get up to do anything other than go to the bathroom and come and sit down and have your meals, and then you were back in bed. Well, we were laying there at the hospital for 5 days, and then we went home and we laid more. Imagine how weak we were. we were so weak. In 2 weeks, when you take a baby up to baptize him, you were just like this. And every time that baby would sleep, you'd sleep.
So with each one, did you go to Nana's house?
No. Okay, that was just with Gary. And then, and then Dad retired. Then Mom was slipping then. Even though she had big dinners for us over at the house and everything, it was hard on her. And so then when Mark came, we had moved from 72nd and Woodson over to, when Gary was 18 months, over to 9221 Madison. And so Aunt Stacia and Aunt Jean would take turns. They would fix my meal. They'd bring it in, get it in the kitchen, all ready to go, set the table. I'm still in bed. Then Stacia or Jean would take Gary over to the house while I had Mark, left the baby with me until dinner time, and then they'd bring him over after dinner so they'd be out of the house so I wouldn't have any disturbance at all. And so this is how it went. And so, let's see, that was Mark, and he was just a good baby. But when he was 3 weeks old, I started to tell you, he got a cold. He was 2 weeks old. He got a cold, and I took that. We had steam vaporizers. The hot air came out. This was before the cold steam air. And I put it right over the crib, right over his crib, just facing over it so he'd get all this moisture. Well, by morning, he was bad. So I called the doctor that said meet us at Baptist. So I ran him to Baptist. Well, it was that next night with the steam over him. I don't know why, but I was going to go get him to nurse him or something, and I pushed the bed out of the way, and that steamer gushed all this hot water down into the bed. I had taken him out. I would have scalded him. He'd had scars all over his face.
Where was he when he wasn't in the bed? Where was he?
I had just picked him up, and I was going to nurse him. And it just gushed. Well, that was the last time I ever did that. Of course, I did worse things to you. And so, anyway, that taught me a lesson. I never wanted to put that hot water over the bed. I'd keep it back in the room, and the mirrors and everything, the windows would get all gummy. You'd have to wash everything. So that was with Mark, and then 2 years later, here you came. And I heard
Was I a surprise?
You were a surprise, which was fine. I wanted 4. I wanted 4 babies.
By that time, you were wanting a girl, probably.
Oh, I wanted a girl all along. Oh, yes. In fact, when Gary came, I just knew it was a girl, and I said, I named the girl, you named the boy.
What did you name the girl?
I wanted a Mark. I forget what name I had even picked out, I really do. And I said, I name a girl, you name a boy. Well, it was the boy. I wanted Mark in the worst way. He's wanting Gary. So he got his way. So I said, in no uncertain term, our next one's going to be Mark. And so whether it was girl or boy, it's Mark. So anyway, that was the boy's name. So then Mark got his name, and I loved that. And I liked Gary's name, but I liked Mark better. And so then when you came, that was really the story. Mark was just, oh gosh, what are you, 2 years and 4 months apart, something like that. Well, he was the biggest mama baby that ever was. I mean, he'd rock that baby bed all across the wall, and all he ever called was, Mommy, Mommy, I want Mommy. And so here you came, and you got out of the hospital, you looked just like Anton. The legs were the same. Both of them were born legs like that. You came with these little legs, looked like him, except you had light brand and blonde. You know, it even went blonde for a while, real light. And so when you came home, we took you up to be baptized. Everything went fine for 3 weeks. And then we took you up to church, had you baptized, and I think someone came into the house with a cold. And you got this cold. So you couldn't breathe at night. By then we were having cold air steam. It was the vaporizers were cold air. You'd plug them in, and it was a moist cold, not hot. And so I took you down to the doctor's, and he said, let's see if we can get him into the hospital. But we have to get a room that you can nurse him at, because he said, we think he's an allergic baby, has some allergies from a heel prick they did on you. And so they couldn't get you in. The hospitals were so crowded. There were so many babies being born. It just, well, you look at Gary's class, what it was when he started school. There were so many babies. So he said, well, you take him home. You're a responsible mother and you can do it. And I had to put you in the baby bed and put plastic all around the bed and put that right into the bed so that it would be like in a nursery where they put they hook you up to oxygen and everything, and you would see them in hospitals where the steam's kind of in there.
So it was cold steam coming in there?
Cold steam, and you were wet. I would take you out. Couldn't keep up with the blankets. I'd change you every time I'd go to nurse you. And I was just exhausted. I was up all the time. And of course I had the other 2 kids there too. And so I just held you, and one day I was just sitting there with you the next morning, or maybe 2 mornings. I probably did this for 2 days. And I was just sitting there, and Stacia came in. They were coming in constantly to get the kids and to help out. And she looked and she said, "Sis, you've got to call the doctor. He's all blue." And you were all blue around the mouth. So I called, and Fairchild wasn't there, and Dennison was there. And he said, I told him, I said, he's blue around the mouth. I didn't even know you were blue around the mouth. I had looked at you so much. And he said, get him into St. Mary's right away. So we rushed you down, and I was nursing, and they said, we have to have that mother's milk. So pump, pump, pump. And they wouldn't even let me stay with you. They just took you away from me. So they would call. They were good. They would call and report on you. And at night, of course, I was up half the night, you could imagine. And they would call, and they called one morning about 5 o'clock. It was still dark, and they said, Mrs. Hense, your baby made it through the night. We didn't think he was going to, but he did. Now, how do you think I felt? And they said to me, don't come near the hospital because we want you to keep this milk. I've bawled Dad out ever since. I would say, Ray, why didn't you go and see Jim? Why didn't you go down? So I don't know. And that first night after we dropped you at the hospital, we went to McDonald's. This was a big deal. There were no McDonald's you could go in. We sat and ate in the car. But this was ice snow out. And we all sat in the car eating hamburgers. Can you imagine? Mark and Gary and Dad and I over on Prospect, 81st and Prospect was the McDonald's. So then you stayed 10 days. And they finally called. You got better as time went. So we went to pick you up, and you weren't, you know where you were? You were laying in a hallway on a cart with sides. The sides weren't up. Well, you weren't going anyplace, but still, no sides. You were laying there in a diaper, not even covered up. You know you were cold. And so I carried clothes to dress you in, to bring you home. And when I walked up to the desk, the nun was there, and she said, oh, Mrs. Hense, you had such a sick baby. We thought we lost him a couple times. Now, how do you think what that did for me? So I went home and took you, and everything was fine from then on. We got along fine, and Aunt Marianne had gone into the hospital with Crohn's disease. Well, all while I was in the hospital with you, she would call me. She was down on another floor, and you think that was helping my mind? Her talking about how sick she was, and all about all the people she knew that was sick. Well, that just set me off. And I got home, and it was at Easter. Now, this was like in March, and Easter was in March. I got in church, and I just, anxiety attack. I thought, I can't get out of here. I've got to get out of this church. I stayed. I was supposed to bake a cake for Easter to go over to Mother's. Everybody brought something. I couldn't make the cake. I couldn't make a cake. And so I think I called Jeannie and said, I can't make a cake, you bake it. And I went over there and I just quit eating. And I don't think you ever realized, naturally, none of the kids did. I probably my average weight was 125 to 30. I probably went down to 100 pounds.
Did you keep feeding me?
Oh yes, until you were 4 months. I had to give it up because there was no more milk. And I just remember that I put in every day, and Marianne kept calling me on the phone, and Jack would say to her, don't call Martha because she's having a lot of trouble with her neck, talking on the phone and holding the baby. She ignored me. she wouldn't call me maybe for 2 or 3 weeks, and she called me again. And she was the one that was bothering me so badly.
So 18 months you said it took before you were feeling normal
and
again.
then I was fine. Then I was fine and gained all my weight back and, and kept on gaining.
How did you find the house on Madison and everything? Why'd you decide to move out there?
Gary was close to 15 months old. He was a little over a year, and he was not in his playpen anymore, and it was a big wood playpen. We had no basement. We had a nice utility room and a nice garage, but one-car garage, and I had to have that playpen put someplace. So that was my reason for moving. So, and I also wanted to go back to Missouri. Jeannie and Stacy were both in Missouri, and my mom, and Ray's mom, everybody. A few of the crowd had drifted over to Kansas, but I was not happy. I wanted to go back to Missouri.
It was a bigger house. Huh?
Yeah. So we wanted a bigger house. So I would take Gary, and we would put him in the little seat, and I'd ride up and down all the blocks looking for houses.
Where did you want to live?
I didn't know where I wanted to live. I just knew I wanted a bigger house.
In Missouri?
And I wanted over in Christ the King Parish, if at all possible.
Was that a new parish?
That was, no, it was, well, it was. It was probably 15 years old, if it was that old. And so when I got over there, we went over to Work Parkway Country Club. It had just been built. We sat in the lot, and I said, "Oh, Dad, look over there. There looks like new homes." So I said, "I wonder how we get to them." So we had to go up to 95th, and we were on a cul-de-sac, come down the hill, and of course, then you know how that area went, 93rd Street, it wasn't cut through, neither was 93rd Terrace, went on up to 95th. So we went to the bottom of the hill, and there was a for sale sign by owner, second house from the corner, and that was ours. So I went up to the door, knocked, and I said, "Could you tell me what you're asking for your home?" And she said, well, she told me, and she said, "But I can't have you in because my daughter's just had a baby." And so I said, "Okay," and I wrote my telephone number down, and I did not ask her, right then I didn't tell her my name, that was it. I just said, "Well, I'll check back with you." Well, I ran over to Stacia's, which was up the hill and just over to 3 blocks, and I said, "Oh gosh, I looked at the neatest house." I said, "It's a nice long ranch home. It has double-car garage," and I said, "Sure looked nice, and it's for sale by owner." So I called her because I had the phone number, and I said, "I just thought I would give you my name, and you'd let me know when I could come." She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I didn't let you come in. Oh, would you please come back?" And I said, "I don't want to bother you and the baby." She said, "Well, you can go in all the rooms except where the baby is." So I said, "Okay," and boy, we all zoomed back over, went through the house, and well, I loved it because it was bigger than our other, and 3 bedrooms, bath and a half, and I just had a bath at the other one. And so then we told him right then we'd take the house. And so
How much was it?
$18,750. And we had paid $12 for the first and got $13,500, and this was just a chunk of like $5,000 or so. But to us, that was. But the thing was, when Dad and I both were working before Gary, we just put checks in the bank because we didn't need them. We had enough coming in that we could save all that. So we had a lot saved. So we moved in. He was 15 months old. And that was about it. And then he was baptized at Queen of the Holy Rosary, and then you and Mark were baptized at Christ the King. Bishop Fitzsimmons baptized Jimmy. And then Aunt Jean and Uncle Jim stood up for Mark. And then when you came along, Aunt Mary Ann was in the hospital. So Jack stood up, and Jeannie Proxy stood up for Aunt Mary Ann. So they're your godparents.
Okay, so she went to the hospital right after she had Rob then.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, she sure did. And to top it off, before that, she was so sick that she was in the hospital, and Jack never fed those kids or anything. Who do you think went over at night and took care of all of those kids? There were 5 of them. He was the last, wasn't he? They had 6. I took care of 6 kids every night. Aunt Jean and I did the heavy on it.
And
I would go over every night. I was this big, ready to have the baby.
You have me?
Yes. And I would sit on the bottom steps. I couldn't even hardly get up the steps to put the kids to bed the night before I went to the hospital with you. And they shouldn't have let me do that. Well, all this wasn't good on me for all that I was ready to go into with having you and everything afterwards. So anyway, we got back over there, and then school time came, and of course I could tell you all the craziness that went on before you ever went to school. Gary was always the leader of the band. He did everything. Drug you kids every place, and remember they took you down to the creek to crawdad and everything, and I wouldn't know where you were, and you were too little to even hardly be out of the house. And yet I was never worried because you were out, like in our backyard, and it was a vast amount of territory. And so Kevin would come over on his bicycle, and he'd climb through the window if we weren't home, make himself a peanut butter sandwich, and put thanks for the sandwich, and climb back out the window and go on. And then Dad and Uncle Jim and Uncle George all put on that big screened-on porch that we just lived out there. It was wonderful. And so, let's see what else. Then when you all went to school, Gary went, and the teacher would call me down, Miss Arkwright. She'd send me notes home, and I'd say, "What's the matter with her anyway? She's a nice kid." Well, he's wilder than a buck. And so called me up to school. So I went up to school, and I stood in the back. She saw me, and she ran out, and she said, "Don't come in now, just look through this window and watch him." So she told them all to be good. And so she came back and stood there, and so pretty soon the little girl in front of me, he takes her pigtails, her long claw, and he jerked her twice. She turned around and got mad at him, and he'd sit there, and then someone else was coming up the aisle, and he's looking, he stuck his foot out and tripped her. And she said, "Now, see what he does all day, all afternoon? It's just half day." And I said, "Oh, it's terrible. I'll have to talk to him." Well, we went like that. He was always got the first mini bike and the first this and the first that, and he was character. So then here came Mark, and Mark just fell into, he was a sweet kid, never gave me any trouble. So I said, well, I'm not sending him to school when he's 5 because I'm going to be just like Gary. Gary could print peas off of the jars, and we thought he was so smart. He never applied himself ever in school. And so Mark went to Boone. And I said, I'm going to send him up there for kindergarten and first grade, and then I'll take him and send him on over to Christ the King. So I did. Well, when it was the first grade, it was time to take him up there, and I thought, he'll be just like Gary. He won't be a student, and I'll struggle with him. I couldn't get him to do homework. I said, I'm just going to leave him, bring him up to Christ the King. He's going to repeat first. And I made him repeat first, and the kid was so smart. He was top of his class. He could do anything. He was a good student. He was a sweet kid. And so that was that. That's why he was held back 1 year. And then when you came along, you had a February birthday. I sent you in September. I said, it's Boone again. And then I'll bring him up to Christ the King, because I did love the school. And, well, let's face it, it was government money, city money and government that put the kids through school. We were paying tuition along with that. But our tuition wasn't that much, $5 a Sunday. If you contributed $20 a month, your kids went to school free. And that was no money. And yet, but we did at the beginning, we would buy books, and it would cost us $60, $70 to get into school. And that was a lot of money when you had $200 some coming in a month. And so we had the money saved. We could do that. But so I left you there for the 2 years because it was a good school, and I liked it.
You did Mark. Me, I was there for 1 year, the kindergarten.
Kindergarten. No, but I left you for first grade. No, I did not.
Mark, yeah.
That's right. I brought you on up. Yeah, I put you there for kindergarten, and then I brought you up.
All I remember is you sent me to Christ the King in first grade, and I was kind of behind everybody because of the curriculum, and you had to come up and do some tutoring.
I tutored you in the hall. That's right. That was true. When you were in the Catholic schools, you learned a lot faster than you did in the public schools. It was more play, get acquainted. But at Christ the King, it was you're in school, you're to learn. And I did. I would come up, probably 3 days a week, because I didn't have anybody else at home then. And whenever Dad would leave the car home, I'd go up and sit in the hall, and they'd send all the little ones that were behind and having trouble. But oh my gosh, it didn't take but a couple of years, Jim, because you were always a good student and you got good grades. Well, let's put it this way, you had good genes. You got them from Mom.
There it is.
I think you got them from Dad, really. But so the two of you just whizzed through school. So that was nice. And then we got up to Rockhurst,
Well, let's take a break there. Who's that you're with?
Well, that is my precious Anton. He is spitting image of Jim.
And what, who's he named after? Where'd the name come from?
It came from his grandfather, from your grandfather, and his name was Anton, Gregory, Anton Gregory Lang. Then he was born in Leavenworth, Kansas, and when he came to Kansas City, he changed that name. Someone told him it should be Anthony, so he called himself Anthony, and he switched it to Tony himself. But when he would go up to Leavenworth and the relatives had come over, it was Anton.
It was Anton?
Uh-huh.
When did he move? Where was he born?
In Leavenworth, Kansas.
Gramps was?
Gramps was. There were 3 boys and 1 girl, and she went to the convent, Sister Mary Evangelista. And she stayed home until she was 21 because the mother died when Dad was 15 and Sister was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And she stayed home and had to get on a stool to cook for them all because she was so little. And then she went into the convent, and then the boys started scattering. See, they were older, and that's when Dad came to Kansas City. Started his own business and everything. He was doors and Lang, paint. Then he went into upholstery. And anyway, I look at this baby, and I see you all over again. When you came home, this is what you
mean just like the scrawny legs and
I
all
didn't
that
want to say that.
Well, he's got scrawny legs. Look
He
at those.
does. That was the first thing when I walked in the door today that I saw. And I looked at the legs. How he's got Jim's legs. That was before I even looked at his face. But, and you never were real husky. But from your pictures, you can see how you progressed. But anyway, so we're thrilled. But the hair. That's just not our hair. Nobody's had this black hair.
And what
Grampsy
about
did.
what about Grampsy's baseball career?
Oh my goodness. Well, he was quite a baseball. He was a pitcher. And they used to go over to Platte City, Kansas to play the different teams. And they wanted him to go professional. And I imagine into the minors is how they started. Wasn't that it? And Grandpa Lang said, absolutely not. You'll lose your religion. That was his most important thing. He'd lose the religion.
Oh.
Oh, honey, is that Daddy being mean to you?
Oh, yes.
So he didn't get to be a baseball player, but as you know, until the day he died, he loved baseball. Never missed baseball on that TV.
Yeah.
So you used to have straight hair, but you've got some curl to it now.
Oh, thank you.
You do.
Let's see. So we were talking about when you moved into the house on Madison, and what happened? When did you?
Gary was 15 months old.
Okay. And who were some of the friends in the neighborhood when you moved in?
The Estradas, our best of all friends, were to the south of us. Marquards were on the left, and he was the one that owned the Romanelli bar at the time. Remember old Fred, the Indian that lived with him? He was always drunk, and he always wanted me to take him up on 79th Street to 79th and Warnell. And he'd say, he didn't want me to know he was getting liquor. He'd say, just park around the corner, I want to go to one of these stores down the way. And I'd park around the corner knowing full well where he was going. And he'd come out and he'd have it all disguised. He'd have big sacks, and I know he had it all in these big sacks. It wasn't a liquor sack. And anyway, then across the street were the Gutierrez's. And they had 2 boys, 2 girls, and you kids played with the Gutierrez. And let's see, Nina was the youngest, and it was Larry, and what were the other ones? You'd probably remember their name better than I would. And then the Adelmans lived up on the hill. On that big hill, it was an empty lot, but they built it up so there was a circle drive up to it. And I was a good friend with her. I played cards with she and Gold. What was her name? It was Gold something. Goldstein lived next door to Estrada's. And they had 3 children. Very protective Jewish people.
When you moved in there, was it the beginning of the neighborhood there? It had been there very long, or?
It had been built probably 3 years at the most. There was still a lot of empty lots. Darton that was next door to Gutierrez's was still empty, and a couple on that block, and then they built after we got in there. Ismerts were there. They had 9, they had 10 children, but the one died. And let's see, I'm trying to think, that was in 58. And then, of course, you came in 62?
Mark came in 62.
No, Mark came in 62, and you were 65. And, of course, everybody in the block played at our house because we were level drive. We'd have the gold. It was so cute. Leo, he would break windows. He would break we had regular glass windows in the garage door. He always managed about once a month or so to break a window. Of course, he never told his mother. Poor old Dad would be up at Harding, getting the glass to put it back in. Then when the BB gun started later, he took out a couple windows in the back. But he was the cutest kid, and he was really the cutest of all those boys. There were, 3 boys and 3 girls.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, what else happened to that neighborhood? It wasn't cut through when we went in there. It was, Ward Parkway was just 2 doors from us, but it was not cut through, so, oh my goodness. Besides having all the kids in the neighborhood down all day long, and I'd have to send them away at lunch, or there'd be days we'd have lunch days, and I'd tell them, you want to bring your sandwiches, we can eat in the picnic. We ate in the picnic bench out in the garage. And someone would bring, they said, we don't have anything to eat. Well, I was always making everybody a sandwich. Some days I wouldn't even send them home for lunch. I'd just go in and make peanut butter sandwiches for everybody. And then we had our turtle races in the backyard. And Mrs. Gutierrez got mad at me because one of the turtles bit Larry, the oldest. Oh, she came over and let me have it. And I said, well, and I was gonna have a hot dog party for him out in the garage. For the one that won, got to come over to a hot dog party, but I was getting hot dogs for everybody. Well, I think we had 8 turtles in the race. Anyway, it was so cute. And then when the winter had come, that's something else. That hill was steep coming in from 95th Street. You go down a real steep hill. And, of course, dead end. So all the ones on 93rd Street, everybody put their chains on their car back then. You couldn't have gotten up that hill if you didn't have chains on. Or they do the snap-on chains, you know. So Reagan was down there, and every time it'd snow, I'd start a pot of coffee. I'd make one pot after another. They'd all sit in my kitchen while the dads were out putting chains on the cars. And some days Dad had gone on to work. And I just opened the door, they all knew they were going to be in my house because they couldn't get up the hill.
Like who?
The Reagans and Jerry Isbert. He went to work a little later. And I remember the Lyonses, that was Dick Lyons, Dick and Joanne Lyons. I see them, they're in our parish now. And let's see, who else would come down there? Trying my darndest to think. Well, let's see, there were a couple other people up there. The Kirks, Mr. Kirk could come down, he'd get his chains on. And they all had the snap-ons in the back of the car. And they'd all come in the kitchen and have coffee. Mm. And a couple of the younger guys would be out putting the chains on while the older guys would come in and have coffee. And of course, I was getting you kids. You know, they were all coming out to the kitchen wanting cereal and everything. And of course, a couple of you were real little, and Gary was always the older one. I was making him do all the work, and he was funny. Of course, all we would do was sit and watch cartoons out in the kitchen. And so, let's see, what else happened while we were in that neighborhood. I remembered later on when Mark, he never got in any accidents. The only one he ever had, he was rear-ended over in Leawood on 95th Street. He went into a bank, slid off the road, went into a bank, and this car came behind him and just bam, back of our car. So naturally, the police took him over to the police station. So we had to get up the hill. So we couldn't get up the hill, and so we had that great big old silvers. What was that? It was a Chevy.
The Pontiac?
No, it was the Monte Carlo. That big front on it, remember? So I got the driver's seat. Dad tried pushing because I took it off of the road. We got up the street in front of, whose house was that? The one that the driveway scooped back? They were Jewish. And he came out and helped Dad push. They put me behind the wheel. Well, I got it up the hill, but it was sure scary. So that was one icy night, and went over to the police station, and there was nothing to it.
What was that one story where we were out the creek or something, and you came out chasing after us on a bicycle?
Oh, that was tragic. That was, Mark was 8 years old because he was pitcher for the baseball team. So Mary Collins brought Danny out real early in the morning and dropped him off. I think she had taken Frank up to Rockhurst, and she dropped him off to play with you kids for the day. Well, he was Mark's age, so I'd always say, take Jim with you. Take Jim with you. Of course, you were right there wanting to go anyway. Of course, they always said, no, we don't want him to come. We'd say, yes, you take him or you're not going either. So across the field we went, and it was, getting on noontime. You didn't come home. But I didn't pay attention to it. So in a little while, Mary called, and she said, well, how are the boys doing? And I said, fine. I said, they went out the back, went out to the field, and I said, they've never even come home for lunch, and look what time it is. And I think it was probably 2 to 2:30. And so she said, well, are you going to go after them? And I said, they'll come home when they get hungry. So I get off the phone, and I thought, oh no, I hope they didn't go through the sewer and go over to the Leewood side, And so I went out, I called, I walked halfway out in the lot, no answer from you guys. So I ran back in the house, and I thought, oh my gosh, are they up at the pool? You'd walk up toward Parkway swimming pool. So I was so excited by then. I jumped on the bicycle that was out in the garage, and I tore up to the Ward Parkway, and you would have been 6, and those two were 8, and I had you paged, no answer. So then I went around the corner and went up Rockhurst Hill. And I'll tell you, I pumped and my legs were killing me. And when I got back and I was pulling in the garage, I was panicking. I knew something had happened to you. Pulled in the garage, and there was my car sitting in the garage. Dad carpooled, and he had left the car that day. He had ridden with this other guy that he rides with. Well, I got out and I yelled to Gary, quick, come. You got to come and help. We got to find the boys. So we went out up the hill and around, and we went, back then, it was a narrow, Warnell was just a 2-lane. Well, I pulled over the bridge as far as I could, and we screamed our heads off for you. No answer, no answer. Well, we went back, and I didn't cry, but I was on the verge of bursting out in tears. So after we got home, we still weren't around. And so your Dad came home from work at 4:30, and of course we had to be at baseball like, 6 or something like that. Well, here the 3 of you came, you had been down right behind the house in the creek crawdadding. And you came back with the buckets and the nets that we had. Well, we kept them all the time. You go, oh my gosh, I didn't have time to feed you anything, so I fixed all peanut butter sandwiches, and we ate in the car on the way to the baseball game. And I called Mary and I said, Mary, we can't bring him home. We can't bring Dan home. We have to take him to the baseball game. I didn't dare tell her I was just feeding him lunch at 6 o'clock at night. So that was about the scariest thing ever happened to me while we lived there.
What about the one where Gary was going off to paddle down the creek when the rain fell?
Oh, thank God I caught him in time. I was out in the afternoon. I knew you all got home got out at 3. Evidently in the carpool someone had brought you all home, and I was out, so I tried to get home around 3, a little after. And he was old enough. They were like 6th and 7th grade. He was okay to be there by himself with you kids. And so I got home, and for Easter, Dad and I ate the bunny rabbit. Dad brought you a great big white raft. You remember seeing it? Do you recall it? And the 2 of them had that thing pumped up, and they were going out the back door. We had our screened-in porch by then. We put that on not too far after we moved in. I said, where are you going? We're going to go down the creek. We're going to ride the rapids. Well, I'll tell you, it was pouring down rain out. And I said, no, you're not. I said, you could swallow it up. No, we're going anyway. Well, I said, no way. Made him come back in. And I mean, it was one of those torrential things that it went over the banks. And that was very dangerous in a little tiny raft. So that was Gary's. Of course, I had a lot of stories on Gary. He got the first mini bike that ever was. and didn't like riding it in the field, so it knew he couldn't ride it because it made noise every time. So Mike Reagan got one, and Mike got one, Gary got one. And of course, here was Mike Reagan's a big fancy one, and Mike's was a big fancy one, and poor old Gary's was this old thing. He bought it for $10. Can you imagine what it looked like with his own money? That was his grass. He had to buy everything he ever got. I never gave him anything. So he bought that with his grass cutting money. And what else? Well, then he had Bill Lillis down one day. Well, you know Mrs. Lillis. She was that, kind of uppity. And he didn't really run around with Bill Lillis that much. But here came Bill. They all knew he had this. So down he came, and he was riding in the street. Well, I was inside, doing your own chore. He was down playing with Gary. And a car, he either hit the back of a car or the side of the car or something. And they came in and told us that the guy came to the door. And he said, "You let this boy ride in the street?" And I said, "No." They ride back in the field. And I said, "No, I was aware they were out in the yard. They ride through Marquard's yard and up in Leo's, and the Estradas didn't care." So how it all went, he wasn't hurt, but we called them out, because I knew I'd better call her. Down she came. She treated me terrible. I was the worst mother that ever lived. And I was not. I just let y'all play in the field all you wanted, that's all. Nobody had all the grounds that we had to play in.
That's right. What about all the animals you put up with the time you were there?
They were tragic too. We started out with, of course, we always had goldfish. And then Gary got into all the ocean fish that they'd have delivered to the house. And we had this big aquarium, and we had the seahorses. Then he got on to seahorses, all seahorses. They'd deliver them. Well, I worried sick over them, because I'd have to run to the fish store and get fresh brine to feed these fish. There was fish food, a certain kind, they didn't like it. And if they didn't eat, they'd die. And so sometimes I couldn't get the brine thing, and I couldn't get them to eat the other, and they'd die one by one, and it made me sick. I said, please don't ever get those kind of fish again. Then they all went in for the exotic ones and the eels and all this stuff, and spooky ones. And so I wouldn't let them get any that would bite if a finger went in there. There are those. So one day I was at home by myself. You were all at school, and the postman or the delivery man came with this box, and I opened it up, and it looked like a snake. It was an eel. I didn't know it. And that thing shot up that paper and took that bag of water all over that box. I'm going, ah. And I thought, I wish they'd get rid of these fish. Well, that was the fish. But of course, the worst of all were the pigeons. Dad he built a cage, and we had to put it up under the eave so nobody would get to those pigeons, the cats in the neighborhood and all. So we went over in Kansas and bought tame white ones, and they were what would you call them, tame ones? They weren't wild pigeons. Mm-hmm. And so they were up there, and
who bought them?
We bought them.
Oh, for Gary?
For Gary. And so he and Mike Reagan went over to the Pigeon Bridge. Now, mind you, our street was not cut through when this happened. And they went over, and the Pigeon Bridge was right next to Stroud's, 85th and Truesdale. They climbed all the pipes. If you'd have seen where they climbed to get this pigeon, and they had the trap with them. They'd gone over on their bikes, and they brought these pigeons home. And I said, you cannot keep those pigeons. And, they let them in there anyway. So I told them, a couple days later, I said, put them back in the cage, and I'll take you over to that pigeon bridge, and you're going to let them out. Because we've got all white pigeons, and we don't want any strays in there. So we got in the car, took them back over, and I watched them. They let them out. We got back in the car, and when we got home, and we had to go all the way out Truce to 95th, over 95th, to past Warner Road, down Madison, and when we got home, who do you think was perched out on the pigeon thing? They had come back home. They found their way back. We never got rid of them. So then we started having mixed pigeons. So I hated those things, and So I played bridge with a bunch of gals in the neighborhood, and this one said to me, "Oh, you should see what's behind our house." Well, first of all, I'll tell you what she was going to say. We said, "See if Mrs. Court will take the pigeons." The Courts had this, they were on 4 acres of land, 5 acres or even more. And it was even more than that. And they were right up at our top of the hill. And so she said, sure. They had a dollhouse. I mean, the dollhouse was the size of this. Maybe not quite as big. They put all the pigeons in the dollhouse. Well, those pigeons had open windows in it and everything. They used to go around the Arnold's house. She lived up the street, and her roof was loaded with pigeons and you know what, all their droppings. And this one gal said, "These Courts behind us, they got these awful pigeons and they drop all over our walks and everything." I just never said a word, knowing where they had originated from.
That was after you'd sent them to the course?
Yeah, that was after. I was playing cards with her, talking about the awful pigeons. Well, then the worst was, now this is how, I shouldn't say dumb I wasn't. I just wasn't informed. Gary wanted traps so he could trap animals. I didn't know what traps were. So he couldn't get them. They wouldn't sell them unless you were of age. So I ordered them, and I picked them up through Sears at the catalog for them. Were these awful traps, and they put them out in the field to catch animals at night. Well, honestly, I don't remember any animals in the field we caught, but when I was playing cards with Dee Lombardo, remember the Lombardos that lived up the street? Okay. Well, anyway, she had 2 perfect children, supposedly. And the kids swim with Mark and Kelly, and she stands next to me at all the swim meets nowadays. I don't say too much about it, but anyway, she said, well, I said that Gary got some trash on that. He better have catch my cat in that trap, or on those traps, or he'll know about it. And I thought, I guess that's possible. I said, you can't have those. I said, you got to get rid of those, Gary. And so in the meantime, he had taken them out to the gorge. You remember that? Were you out there? Were you old enough?
I remember.
Okay, so they put around were howling, so that they sat on the gorge. Well, they had caught a great big possum out, and he was a wreck because he wanted that trap back. So he came home and got Dad. And he said, "Come on out." He said, "Come out." He was at Mike Corniss's house. That's how he got down there. "Come on," he said, "you gotta get our trap. There's an animal caught in his legs in it." And he said, "Oh, it's bleeding."
What did he think he was going to catch in it?
Well, he thought he'd catch something. Maybe it'd be dead. And maybe somebody had taken it out. I don't know. So Dad went out, and poor Dad had a baseball bat, and he beat the thing till it died, and they all sat up on a wall and watched him. And Dad said, "Get rid of those traps." He said, "I'm going to throw them in the trash on Monday." Well, Mike Reagan was with him. He said, "I'll take them, I'll take them." So that's how I got rid of those traps. But then what happened after that? Oh my
What
gosh.
about the poor rabbit?
Oh, that was the last of it all. That was the last of all the animals we had had. Oh, then they brought skunks. Remember that? Oh yeah, he was up in the, Gary was up with Mike Reagan again at the apartments over there where Barthol's lived, off of 95th and, what was that, Bannister. And they got a baby skunk and brought it home. Put it in a box. It was out in the garage, and I said, "Oh, you can't keep a skunk." "Oh, Mom, can't we get it? What do you call it when they remove that gland?" So here, dumb me, I'm calling every vet's place to ask them if they did that surgery, and they'd say yes. It was $25. $25? I didn't have that kind of money. I said, "I'm not doing such a no." I said, "Just get rid of it. Just take it out into the field and let it go." Mike Reagan said, "I'll take it, Miss. I'll take it, Miss Hens. I'll take it." And I said, "Well, you can't take it unless you ask your mom." "Okay, I'll ask her." So he came back. He said, "My mom said I could bring it home." And I said, "Well, you know you have to take that little gland out." He said, "She said we would." I said, "Okay." Well, I hope that she never hears this, but she was alcoholic. And that's why Mike was always at our house. I wouldn't let Gary sleep over there. I'd always say, "You have to stay at our house." And so he'd say, oh, and he loved to spend the night. There was one boy and one girl. So he hadn't told his mom at all. Took it home, took it to bed with him, back in his bed in his room. And the second day he had it, it went all over the room. It became a little older at this point. It went for a couple of weeks. Well, can you imagine what that house smelled like? I never called her. I didn't have the nerve to call her to find out. Well, so that was that story. What else did Gary do that was so bad? Listen to it.
Yeah, about the rabbit.
Oh, well, okay, so after all these animals, the skunks and the pigeons and the goldfish and everything, we got Blossom. So we went and it was, we had chickens. Oh, you knew about that. We had all kind of colored chickens you'd get at barbecue. They were blue. This was funny. This was when you were much younger. And Dad was going out of town, and I stayed up all night with a light in the box because they're supposed to have heat as babies. So here I've got these chickens, and I'm sleeping out on this little tiny love seat with the light on. I couldn't sleep all night. I was a nervous wreck for fear to go catch the box on fire. And they got through the night. Well, we kept those, and as they got bigger, they were losing their color. We had to get rid of them, so Dad put them all in the car and rode out homes. And when he got to a farm, he saw a great big bunch of them over the fence. Regular chickens, all white. He dumped the colored chickens over the fence. They were getting too big. And he said he often wondered what that farmer thought when he walked up and saw colored chickens in with his. Well, that was the chickens. But back to the rabbit. This is the last of the story on animals. So we got Blossom and got her for Easter. Everything was always for Easter. And she was a smart rabbit. Kept her caged in the basement, and whenever she'd have to go, she'd jump in that cage, and then she'd get out. We'd let her come upstairs. She'd go out on the porch. I didn't let her in the house. She was in the basement or out on the porch. And so, anyway, so one day, you three were sleeping. It was summertime. I'd always get up morning. I'd sort the wash, and I would never even start the wash because I wasn't about to wake the three of you. So I was down there sorting it out, and here came this rabbit. Oh, I mean, he was big. When he stood on his hind legs, he was as tall. So he came at me, sorting the darks and the whites, and he put his teeth through my fingers. And when we ever heard they have two front, I couldn't get those out. I was jerking, and and he was so heavy, I couldn't even push him away. Finally got him out, I jumped up on the ping pong table, and I grabbed the ping pong bat. And nobody believes this story, but it's true. He growled, just like a dog. And people say, rabbits don't growl. And I'll attest, they growl. Because it was growling at me. And I've got this mallet in my hand. And I thought, now
were you
look.
bleeding too?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. But I had all the laundry on. I was getting the blood off it. I didn't care whether I was bleeding or not. And he got his paws up on that table and looked at me. And I thought, now look, if you dare to try to come up on this table, I was going to kill him. I was going to hit that thing hard and I'd kill him. So pretty soon, I bet I sat down there an hour. So on the ping pong table, waiting for him to leave. And he'd wander around the basement, and pretty soon he jumped into his cage, and I took a shot for those steps. I jumped off that table and ran up those steps with my mallet in hand. Then I got on the phone, called all the vets, called Dad, and he said, well, you better call, and the vets and see what we have to do with this. So they called and they said, you have to keep it 10 days to see if it's rabid. And they said, get gloves up to your elbows and feed it in the cage. And they said, when you feed it and you leave it in the cage, you can't let it run the basement or anything again. It stays there for 10 days. And then if it lives, it's okay. It's not rabid. Well, I wasn't going to keep it. So I said, what are we going to do with it? So Uncle Tut, our Pop's Gramps' brother, he raised rabbits. In fact, during Depression, that's all we ate were rabbits every Sunday. They were good. They were white. They weren't dark meat, domestic ones. And so I told all you kids that we took them to Uncle Tut, and he ate them. And who do you think ate that? Grampsy. Gramps said, bring that rabbit over here. I'll eat it. He said, there's nothing wrong with that rabbit. So Gramps cut its head off and skinned it and fried it. And we couldn't eat the rabbit. I could not. We go over on Sundays. And I couldn't eat that rabbit. They had us over because we'd given it the rabbit.
Oh, really?
Oh, I would eat it.
We all went over?
We all went over. Oh, we were over to Grant.
But we didn't know that was the rabbit.
Oh, no idea. You all ate it like it was good.
We thought Uncle went to live with Uncle Tut,
Oh,
wasn't that it?
definitely. And at that time, all you wore glasses. Everybody wore glasses. That's all we ever wore. And we used to go down to 12th and Walnut to this little old guy. He was the sweetest thing. Mr. Singer got us onto him.
Ray Optical.
Ray Optical, that was it. And so every time we'd go down, you'd say, "Can we go on Uncle Tut and see blossoms?" "Oh, please." Uncle Tut lived at 12th and Cleveland, way over east. "No," I said, "he's an old man now. He takes naps. We can't go in the middle of the day." So you never got to see Blossom. So after that, I said to Ray, "Okay," I said, "I give up. We'll get him a dog." I fought a dog for 17 years. We had not had a dog. And everyone else had. The Cornices had gone through 2 dachshunds. Jeannie had dachshunds. Everyone had dachshunds in the family. Is that your phone? And so anyway, we went out to a dachshund farm, and we brought Shotzi home. She was just darling. She was like 6 or 8 weeks. Sweet dog. And you know, they have their personalities too. Sometimes dachshunds can be a pill. But this one was, well, she was a joy forever. She was the sweetest dog, and we had bought our house in where we are right now, 12012 Addison, and we were going to move, and she was sick. She was getting sick and having accidents, and just, she couldn't see. She bumped into a chair, and I knew then that she was going blind, but I could not put her to sleep. Oh, I couldn't do that. I was going to cage her into the kitchen, because the kitchen was going to be a big kitchen. And so one day, Dad, I was back, I don't know what I was lying down, and Dad called me out to supper, and I'd had soup on, and he was dishing up the soup, and he said, "Come on, we'll eat." And I said, well, I went out in the kitchen, and he said, "You notice anything different?" And I looked over, and I said, "No." "So, you notice Shotzi's box?" I looked, I said, "Where is it?" He said, "Well, he had her put to sleep." Oh, I was so grateful, because all I could see was all this new carpeting I was getting, and all this beautiful home with everything new, and I'm taking in a sick dog.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good deal. So I think that's about kind of covered. You and Mark, oh, you did the laundry up at Rockhurst when you two went through high school? That was wonderful. So, of course, paid for Gary's tuition and all, but then when Mark went, Al Davis saw him. He'd be down at the football field. Remember in grade school, Mark was the big football player that I was they couldn't catch him. He was so fast. Remember, and I always had him at Baptist Memorial, because they'd gang up on him and about kill him. And oh, his ankle, he was a complainer. Oh, his legs, oh, his arm. So we'd run him in the emergency room. Nothing ever was broken. So anyway, oh, look at this sweet thing, Jim. He just loves these stories. So anyway, let's see, what about Mark? Oh, so he got up there, and Al Davis said, "Don't you live across the street?" And he said, "Yeah." He was water boy for the team football. And he said, and he wanted to play football in the worst way, but he had that Osgood-Schlatters disease. And I'd had x-rays down at KUMed on him and everything. You can't play, they said, because his heels were so bad. So anyway, he came, so he said to him, "Come on up here." He said, "I want you to do the laundry for the athletic program." And he said, "Tuition free." And Mark said, "My mom's already paid tuition." No, he said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "Well, come here, let me give you this paper, and I'll fill it out, and you take it to your mom. And if you don't want to do it, or she don't want you to do it, that's fine." So he brought it home, and I saw tuition free. I went nuts. I said, "Mark, why wouldn't you do that?" And so I said, "I'll tell you what, I'm gonna make a bargain with you." I said, "I will take, now let's just guess, I think tuition at the time was $800 a year. And I said, I will take $400 and I'll put that up at the bank, and that is your money. That's like you cutting grass, going working at the grocery store, whatever." And I said, and then you can go up there, and I said, just think you could do your homework and everything when you run up and throw that in. Well, so he did, and that was a good deal. And then you took over when Mark left.
Yep.
And one Sunday we were at Mass, it was 10:30 Mass, and Al Davis came running after Ray. And he said, he said, "My boy used to do the athletic program." And he said, "Since then, I've never had anybody decent to do it." And he said, "You got the finest 2 boys." And he said, they told me when they were doing the laundry, we don't let anyone go here tuition free. And he said, I told him, these boys are, because they're doing a good job, and I trust them, and so just let it alone. And so he said, after those boys, there were a couple others. Remember Mary Whalen, you told that? Well, I think after that, they charged some tuition. But anyway, you had the best times. You'd go up there, and you'd go into the pottery room. Remember you loved your pottery so? And you'd do your pottery and then run down and switch it over to the dryer. And then last load, you'd leave in the dryer and come home, and the next morning before class, you'd run put to the dryer, and it didn't hurt you.
Yeah, so I did it.
It was great. So that helped Mom too, you know. You didn't have to go out and do all those cutting the grass and wearing out Dad's lawnmowers. God, we went through lawnmower like
I still did that. I still cut grass.
Did you?
I still cut a couple yards all through high school.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Well, maybe you did.
Yeah, the Hanges and the lady across the street from her, Mrs. Mitchell.
That's true.
They cut their lawn
That's
for
true.
several years.
That's true. So anyway, that was our life on Madison. And then we got out to the new house, and you were ready for college that year.
You moved after my freshman year, I think you moved.
I thought it was your freshman. Was it after? Well, I know that after we were there and Crow announced that they were going to put those buildings in our backyard, you know, not our backyard, but across the way where the synagogue was. Well, the synagogue was still there. And so they were going to do that. And of course the neighbors, we were all up in arms over this big building. It was coming. It was hot. It was, who was going in there? The drug, Hoffman.
Yeah.
Hoffman drug. And so
Marion Labs.
Marion Labs, that was it. And so they promised us all there would be no parking outside. It was all going to be underneath. Well, we thought that was great, but you realize how many ground, they had to go down like 6 stories down for parking. So I would sit up at night in the dining room, and I'd just sit there and cry. That when they go down into you'd hear the horns honking, because as they turn those corners, they'd have to honk to let and one know not to come up, and that went all night long. They would go up and down, hauling dirt out of there for that garage. So we were trying to get Crow Brother to buy our houses, and they said no dice. We'll just put. And so how it all worked out is they finally got so sick of us. They said we could do it, and that they would let us out of our houses, but they wouldn't give us any more than market value, that's all we wanted. I didn't want any more. I just wanted just what was worth our house just to move. So Dad, what do you think Dad did? He sat home and watched football. And he'd say to me I'd say, don't you want to go look at the house? No, you go, whatever you find's fine. So I'd go and drive all the streets in and out. I went through Leawood, I went up and down every street. Well, I'd always end up at 120th because it was just getting developed. There were probably no more than 10 houses in our area when we built that house.
Right.
So finally, the first thing, so when I went through it, I loved it because I saw the size kitchen, and when I went in the dining room, it had mirrors on the wall, and that's so pretty. The best part of all is when I went down the steps, 2 bedrooms down there, I thought, this is the best thing ever happened. I'll throw those boys down here. We'll never have to bother with them again. And it was just a perfect plan for us. And a house that we could stay in until we were old. With no steps, we don't have to go to the basement. We put everything right on that upstairs floor. And a lot of our friends that have moved out and gone apartments and looking for condos now have all said, if we had your house, we wouldn't have moved. They've all have 2-story houses. So anyway, that was nice. And that's how we got out. So what was funny was we went and we sat down, we filled out the papers and everything, and Charlie Kaler sold us the house, which he upset me in many ways, but it was a good deal anyway. So he's filling that we're all doing, and the exhibition house was sold by then. So Dad didn't even get to see it. I went and picked out the fixtures and everything, and so our salesman was Mary Edith Byrne. You know, you had to go through a realtor and pay that. You couldn't just, no realtor. So she was our realtor, and she said, I said, Ray hasn't seen the house at all. And she said, hasn't seen it? And I said, it's just on paper. And she said, well, we'll go down to the Orslin. She said, oh, that Leanne and Phil Orslin are the nicest people. They built one just like it. And she said, Leanne will let you go through hers so he can see it. And so I called Kay, and I called Patty. Stacia was out of town. Kay and Patty and who all was around? I guess that was it. And I ran over and got Dad at work that day. I don't know why he didn't have a car. Maybe it was, I don't know, maybe when you kids had it at school at the time. And so when we went in the front hall, Patty watched him. He stood in the front hall and looked out into the living room, and she said he just looked at him. He just, he didn't think it was as big as it was. Mm-hmm. He didn't dream it was the size that it was. And it's 3,200 square feet. That was big. So he just stood there kind of looking. He was kind of overwhelmed. He was probably wondering if he was going to be able to pay for it. And so, but that was the first time he had seen the house.
That's funny.
That was terrible. But it was his own fault. He could have seen it a long time ago, but he wouldn't go with me. So, but he accepted it. Anyway, as you know, Mom got what you wanted.
Oh, yes.
So that was in our... Let's see, and then you two were down at school. Didn't come home that often, but when you came home with all the dirty clothes with the cockroaches in them. Mm-hmm. And I got so you put them out on the deck and let deer come in that house. And I sorted them on the deck, and I'd shake them out. Wasn't that awful?
Yep.
So, but we had a lot of fun. And let's see, you brought the fraternity up one time. What was that when they all came up to our house? Something was going on in Kansas City. Maybe the Big 8 or something. I have no idea. Remember
we took the ski trip the one time. I had friends over, and then we took the ski trip to Colorado, and they stayed at the house that night.
That was the one on Madison.
Yeah, when the electricity went out.
Electricity went out. Dad had left for Colorado on a business trip, and it all went out just as I pulled the lasagna out of the oven. And we ate with candlelight, and the next morning you were going, and that was the tragic thing. You all left, and that morning when you left, I'm sure you were going with little or no money hardly. Mm-hmm. And I said to you, here's my credit card in case anything happens, Jim. And sure enough, you needed the credit card. And when I heard the story, how you kept going from one mountain to the next ski resort, and then had to drive back in the dark down the mountains to catch your plane.
In a storm.
And to top it off, you said you couldn't even hit the brake, because if you hit the brake, you'd have gone over the side. And you put it in low, and it went down the mountains that way. I tell you, when I think about it, well, it was the idea when you got out, they wouldn't give you a car. Yep. And they told you,
that's right.
You said you had your mom's credit card, and they said if she's responsible for it, but you be the only driver.
Yep.
So I'm glad you did, because one of the other ones might have taken you over the mountain.
Yeah, that's right. Talk about how the Cornices came, how they acquired the lake and how all that came about.
Oh gosh, that was back in, Mike was 3 months old, so that would have been in 58. And it belonged to the Noonans, who were friends of Grandma and Grandpa. And they had had it for years, and it was a frontier. But it had an easement on it. And that meant that the second tier could use it. They could come down on that narrow easement. Well, it was a big drop-off the next lot, next door. But what happened is they had a shed. They had just a wood shed there with curtains around it to dress in. And the big stone fireplace, which still stands. Mm-hmm. And George won't get rid of that. That's a part of the lake to him. We don't use it. But anyway, he keeps it. So that was in 58. Mike was 3 months old. And so that put Gary at 9 months old. He's 6 months older than. And they got it for $1,500. And so then at the same time, George bought a second tier lot behind. And he paid $1,000 for that. And the reason, so he could come down and put 2 docks in. So that would keep the second tier from coming down. There was no other place to put a lot, because Summers has had theirs on there, and they would be blocked. So what happened, George got in the middle of that. He put $300 in on it. And I think times were getting, he was going in for his own business and everything. And, you know, there were tight times. You could be a rich man and still have your money tied up. So Jeannie Solutions and us took over the lot. And it was so cute. Mother and Jeannie and myself, every month we put in $5. The payments were $15 a month on it. I put $5, and then when Nana kind of got her Alzheimer's, you know, and she was kind of forgetting what she was doing, which, by the way, they say it wasn't Alzheimer's. Dr. Chang says he was sure it was probably a brain tumor, is what she had, but we didn't do an autopsy, so we don't know. So Jeannie and I took over $750 a month, and we paid $24 a year for maintenance on the road. Well, how it all goes, I'll make this shorter. Jeannie died. It was paid for. Oh yeah, we paid it off a long time before she died. And Uncle Jim took over on, and there were no really assessments because it wasn't connected. The water had come in on the main, and George and Stacia paid for that on their place. And Uncle Jim, now it's not tied up, but Uncle George wanted to get some money out for us. That thing is worth, it's thousands of dollars right now.
You still have it?
Yeah, but our name's not on anymore. George wants to give us money. He's going to have Jim turn it over to the kids. Turn it for $1 over to Greg. You know how you can do that. And then George says he wants to give Dad some money on it. You got off? We're going again. So how it goes now, they just, Dad, Uncle Jim, and Uncle George built that whole thing from the bottom up. They had the foundation poured for just the basement. That's it. And then eventually they went up with all the wood. They went up 2 stories on that thing. And then, let's see, it was a kitchen, a nice sized living room, kitchen and dining room combined. And then one great big long sleeping porch up on the 2nd floor, which you could divide and make 2, but they've always left it 1. And then years later, George had it contracted. He didn't do it. On the roadside, they poured a great big family room, and that's there now. And then they put in a garage next to the family room. And right today, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful home, and it's all painted. They got permanent siding done. And all the windows are new and all the permanent, so no maintenance.
Yep.
And
we're out there just about every Sunday for years and years.
We did. That was our vacation place. We would go out on Sunday and take Nana and Gramps, and they quit riding with your dad. Nana said, I don't want to ride. He looks everywhere but the road when he drives. And he does today. Dad can go any place and tell you what building is where, what the sign's on it. And I'm sitting next to him, and I'm saying, drive, don't look. And when we took trips out, like last year with the Cornices out in Colorado, we would say, Ray, you drive, we'll look. And because he's looking like this and driving at the same time. He's that way today. I can't break him of it. And so Mother just finally said, I won't ride with him. So Lucinda used to have to pick him up because she wouldn't ride in her car with him anymore. But he didn't have accidents, so.
Well, we're about done, I think. And it's September the 3rd, 2004.
Right. And I got a darling grandson here and a granddaughter.
Got to hear it all.
My California kids. Yes, you did, sweetheart. Someday you'll listen to that. Won't you? Yes, oh, goodness.